So the last case, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and anything you want to ask, but I want to spend a little time on this last case, which I'm still investigating with some friends in France. This is, again, a woman. She's a businesswoman, late 40s, mid-40s. She contacted me in September last year, and she said that two sort of strange things had happened to her. The first time in October 2016, she noticed a mark on her hip that faded again in about a week. And here, you have a picture there of a part of a circle. It's starting to fade, but you can also see these axes of the circle. And then, she saw it. Her husband saw it. It went away. It didn't hurt. She never had an explanation for it, just like all the other cases we've looked into. But in all the other cases we've looked into, these people had not seen UFOs. They just had a mark that was strange. So there are a couple of groups around the world on the internet that you can find that gather those cases, trying to come up with an explanation. And so far, there is no explanation. And I'll show you some of the catalogs of pictures that they've come up with. So this was the second case that I encountered in my long and painful ufological career, where people had both the mark and the UFO, or the light or the experience. In July 2017, in Brittany, bright afternoon, she's driving with her daughter, sitting in the back, and a friend of her daughter's who was a teenager. And her car was being fixed, so she had a loaner, and the loaner had an open roof. I mean, there was glass, but you could see the sky from the inside of the car, which is why the case becomes interesting, because they saw a large disc, gray disc, in the middle of the afternoon over the expressway, flying over towards them. And it eventually flew slowly over their car at a low altitude. Very clear gray disc. She saw that coming. Again, she's a very smart, quick businesswoman, no nonsense. She gave her camera to the kid in the back and said, "Take a picture, I'm driving." The kid took a picture. So let's go back to the skin marks, which people call crosshair. If you search on the internet, search for crosshair or for skin mark, and you'll find those groups. There is one, in this particular one is in France. We've got cases from across the globe, in every country, including Russia. Again, mostly women, all ages. And it's not always the same shape, but it's always a series of circles, 1, 2, or 3 circles with radii across these circles. Sometimes just 2 forming a cross, sometimes 6 point, sometimes they touch to the center, sometimes they don't. But it's always sort of the same geometric shape, but there are differences. In other words, it's not one device. So, the first idea is, well, maybe when they went shopping or they were on the street, maybe this lady was wearing, a sleeveless shirt, and somebody had a laser with drawing a particular picture, and for fun, made the mark on the skin. Well, it's not like that. First, it also shows up under the clothes, and it's not always the same thing, and it's not a laser burn. In one of the cases that happened not far from here in California, I heard about the case and I drove down, I flew down from San Francisco to meet with the woman, went through her house. There was absolutely no evidence of anything that would have caused the mark. And then it happened again. The mark faded, and then it happened again. When it happened again, we took her to research dermatology department, and they did a biopsy of the mark, right on the mark, when it was very visible. And the dermatologist said they'd never seen anything like that before, that it wasn't on the skin, that it was under the skin, it was in the derma, not in the epiderma, that it was everything they could think of, it wasn't. It wasn't a virus, it wasn't a bacteria, it wasn't a laser, it wasn't a burn, it was not an allergy, it was not any of those things. And this is where we are. So this woman in France, I was even more interested in the fact that she had the pattern of the concentric circles, but she had also seen this disc flying over, and there was a picture. So how often do you have all three of those? Even the UFO and the skin mark are very, very rare. And so those are, I don't go chase ambulances. I don't go investigate every case. I only want to go to cases that can teach me something more, something new, something I haven't seen before. And that's why I'm going through these 5 cases. This is a picture. Let me blow it up. There is a spot on the cloud that may or may not be a shadow of the object, but the object is far away from them, and it's not a disk. It's not a gray disk. It's, it looks, you could say it's a drone, but it doesn't really look like a drone. It's dark. It's under the cloud, although it's projecting on this other cloud. And I have absolutely no idea why the picture she took didn't show what she saw. And again, we have other cases like that, except the witnesses are reluctant to produce them because they look silly. I mean, I took a picture of something. Well, where's the picture? Well, it didn't show anything. Well, okay. Or it showed something, but that has no relationship to what that person is describing to me. And I've had a few experiences like that before, but never with the actual proof. And here we have the proof of, first I believe this woman. I've met with her several times. She's been at my place in Paris. We've reinvestigated the case with friends of mine who are part of the advisory board for the French Space Agency, which, by the way, has an ongoing UFO research group, and people of vast experience investigating cases in that part of the country. So again, we're looking for all the expertise we can bring in to zero in on how we can help these people and help ourselves form a picture of the phenomenon. But the phenomenon, it used to be pretty simple. I mean, it used to be flying saucers. Come on. With occasionally some robot would come out. And now we have to deal with, a crisis. We have to deal with injuries. We have to deal with complex physiological situations, occasionally death. And then we have to deal with good pictures that don't show anything, and sometimes in combination. So if you think I'm puzzled, I am. Thank you. I think there's a microphone somewhere. I can't see you because of this beam of light that somebody is shining to me. But we have plenty of time for questions. And yes?
Do you see any more belongings
You are?
Is there any morgellons in the skin?
No, but when there is a case with physiological effects or injuries, I always refer them to a doctor. I mean, I'm not the one to really investigate it. So. No, I have not seen that particular. Why, do you know of cases that are like that? You did? Well, I'd like to know more about that.
Mr.
Yes.
Vallee, in terms of the crosshair phenomenon, do you see, is there a correlation to the crop circle phenomenon? And do you have any thoughts on the crop circle phenomenon? The crop circles in general?
Of course, we've tried to look at that and say, what kind of symbol is it? Well, the first thing we thought about is if you look at a hairdryer, you turn the hairdryer towards you, and you look at the end of the hairdryer, it looks like this. Okay, so we thought maybe, this woman, I mean, women use hairdryer more than we guys do, so maybe she burned herself with the hairdryer. Well, if you try to do that, you're going to get burned, all right, but it's not going to look like this, okay? You'll have a burn. And so it's not that. Although in some cases, the dimensions are pretty much the same as the ones on the grid in the front of your hairdryer. But it's not always the same pattern. As you could see, the pattern changes. Then you look at ancient literature and books of symbols and so on, and there is a pattern that looks exactly like that: 3 concentric circles and radial lines, and that's a pattern of Atlantis. Atlantis is said by Plato that there was a palace that was built on this island. And the palace was in the center of a ring of canals, and then there were roads across these canals, and so the pattern is the same. But I don't see the relationship to Atlantis especially. But if you look at dictionaries of symbols, that's a symbol that's going to come up. Beyond that, we really have no idea, except that, again, we've done the expertise with a biopsy of the live mark, and it was not on the epidermis, it was not a tattoo, it was not a laser burn, it was not a microbe, it was not any of that. It was not an allergy. So it's not. Well, what is it? It was embedded below the skin, in the derma. That's all I can tell you so far.
Hi.
So, and on some of those, we've done the research, and we've pushed it as far as we could. Going to see the witnesses, getting the data, getting the medical, biopsy, taking it to the lab. We've gone pretty much as far as we could, and we still can't answer the question. It's good questions.
I have 2 comments and 1 question, please.
Speak a little bit louder, please.
I have 2 questions and 1 comment, please. Okay. On talking about those markings, I suspect that they're very simply designations, because people that show up with markings have had interactions. They've been transported, however you want to say it, taken up on a craft. And so it's probably just something simple like they get test A, they get test B, check them for this. It's just almost like we'd use a barcode to designate what was going to go to you. So I would think that's my first comment.
Well, that was one of the ideas going in, except that none of these people had a UFO experience.
No, they don't remember that they did. That doesn't mean they didn't.
So, okay, so you have to assume that they've had an abduction in their past that they are blocking.
The phenomena of which I'm personally related to is really interesting. And I've worked with people and done regressions and things. And what I've found, speaking for myself and for a lot of other people, is that when you're confronted with something that is so other that you have no frame of reference and there's no way you can put it any place in your thinking, that you blank it out or you turn it into something else. And that may have been, you know, when they all saw a craft go overhead of the car and it was a certain shape. That's what their mind might have turned it into because they just weren't expecting to see what the camera captured.
You're absolutely right that people will block a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
And you could argue the mark is there to remind them that that something has happened to them.
In a sense,
it's a
yes.
signature.
It's a clue for your consciousness.
You could say that, but I can't say that because the witness, I asked a question, the witness didn't tell me that.
Right, that's
so
right.
I have to go by, and again, there are these groups around the world gathering this kind of, evidence, and they look for correlations with other things,
Right.
and they have not found that, but it could be. And then now we have these two cases. But remember, in the last case, the camera did show something.
Yes,
The
absolutely.
picture was taken of something real,
Yes.
and except it wasn't what they saw.
Right, exactly. Because they were expecting if they were going to see anything, it was going to look like the round craft, which apparently even the Roswell crash, it wasn't a round craft.
You absolutely, you can, that's a
Yeah.
hypothesis.
Yeah. And my question is regarding the film that the woman took of the balcony and the
Yes.
light. I mean, I'm sure you've thought of this, but I just would like to ask you, was there an increased radiation involved in the filming, and that's why perhaps, it didn't show up?
If there had been, it would have wiped out the background, and the background is very clear. I mean, it's a good picture.
Maybe I misunderstood. Didn't your FX friend have to pull up the background, or was the background always visible?
Okay, when you looked at you know how the 24-hour shot down the
Yeah.
corner, you know how it works. It's got some big robot. They put the film. It's not adjusted for your film.
Right.
It's adjusted across whatever Kodak says, and then they print it. And they print it. It's adjusted to the pictures that have colors and lights and so on.
Right.
And if a picture has been taken, at midnight with no light, the robot is going to ignore it. Okay, so to see what's really there, you really have to do what we did, which was to scan it. We did not really need to enhance it to see what was there, but somebody casually looking at the print, which is again a generation away from the negative. We had the negative. Okay, I mean, everything that people say about UFOs, about pictures, if they are working from prints, is worthless. It can be anything.
Yeah.
Okay? Especially these days with Photoshop.
Sure.
So, I mean, but that's why I like, the old way of doing things, where you have a negative, you can look at the negative,
That's
which
right.
is what we did. She had taken a good picture of the countryside at midnight, and so there were
Okay.
you could see the cars, you could see the lamps,
Okay.
but you couldn't see the object. So even if there had been some form of radiation, it would
have fogged the rest of
have
it.
either erased everything,
Right.
or or it would have shown, it would have burned the film.
Right. Okay.
So-
Thank you very much.
So that's where we are.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for your questions.
Hi, I have just a quick question for clarification purposes. The last picture you showed with the black image and the mark, was it all related to the woman in the car with where she's trying to take the where her son was trying to take the picture?
So the picture was taken through the glass on top of the car.
Okay, and
Yes.
the mark related to her too?
No, the mark was
someone
a
else.
couple of years before.
Okay, thank you.
And was taken directly.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're one of the very few researchers who actually believe that all paranormal phenomena is related, whether it's aliens, Bigfoot, gnomes, or fairies. But like most tend to reject that. Would you please explain why you think all paranormal phenomenon is related, or at least comes from one single source?
I'm a data scientist by training. Okay, I have a degree in astrophysics, but most of my career has been with computers. So I don't start from physical hypotheses or that kind of thing. I look for patterns. I look for patterns in history, and I look for patterns in data and databases. And I try to do that without projecting my own belief system or my own culture, but you can't avoid doing that, obviously. But there may be something that we're all missing. But I try to be as general as I can. When you look at the Middle Ages, and I've published a book with some colleagues of mine called Wonders in the Sky, where we went back to archives going back to the Egyptian times, and not just the pictures and so on, but really screening the actual reports. When in most cases we know the place and we know who wrote the report. You have, the patterns are the same, in terms of time of day, in terms of the colors, in terms of the light, in terms of the effects on people, including the medical effects. There are, in the lives of the saints, published by the Vatican, you have descriptions of, I think Saint Francis of Assisi one day was praying with others, and something came from the sky that he describes pretty much as a machine with a man or some sort of angel on it that shot beams on him and hurt him. And he was in pain for the following 2 years, and he died, okay? And he thought that he was delighted with this because he thought that this was a sign from heaven selecting me. Of course, he was being, very spiritually advanced. He wasn't afraid of dying. He wasn't afraid of suffering. He thought he had been selected for, as a reward. And he died in great pain 2 years later. So what do you do with this? Again, this is, if it happened in Brazil, 10 years ago, it would be, you would say, well, it's another thing that happened in Brazil, except that it happened, centuries ago. And it's in the religious records, not in the astronomical records or anything else. So, and you will find the same thing in China, you'll find the same thing in Japan. What happened to Nichiren in Japan, okay? Where Nichiren was sort of a heretic religious leader in Japan. He was condemned to death. The day when he was going to die, there were phenomena that happened, scared everybody, and they ran away. But he also, I think there was a solar eclipse that day that scared everybody and saved his life. But in the life of Nichiren, You have other phenomena where there was a disk that flew over and that projected beams. Well, this is in the records of a religious tradition in Japan, that there are millions of followers of that tradition. And the base of the tradition is a UFO sighting. So you have to cross over those different boundaries, just like in Catholic miracles with the Virgin Mary, with Fatima and others. You have that enormous impact on the consciousness of people and the phenomenon we still cannot understand, except it has the same patterns as these phenomena. So thanks for your question. Yes, sir.
Thank you for being here. I want to know if you remember analyzing film from a Costa Rican case in 1971,
Yes.
taken by a Costa Rican government mapping plane flying over Lago de Cote or Lake Coder.
So, yes, there I had the negative. The film it's an unusual, let me put this down. It's an unusual film because it was shot by an airplane doing mapping.
Right.
So it's shooting down.
At
It's a
10,000
very,
feet.
very high resolution camera.
Right.
And every negative is this big. Okay?
Right.
So, almost a square foot. And I got obviously they don't have any need for it anymore. So the Air Force in Costa Rica let my friends get the film. And so we have the 3 images uncut of 3 frames.
299, 300, and 301, and it only showed up in 300.
Well, so the object is clearly there. It looks like a disk. I have no idea what it was. There is no disturbance in the lake. I've been there.
Right.
It's a part of Costa Rica. Costa Rica is very beautiful. I love that country.
Absolutely.
It's very volcanic, as you know.
Absolutely.
There are 2 lakes at different altitudes that are formed by
RNO and Lago de Cote.
volcanoes. And they have something very clever. They pump the water from the lower lake back into the higher lake every night so that it can generate electricity during the day by flowing down. So they keep recycling the water. That higher lake is where it happened, Lago de Cote.
Right.
And when I was there, it was flooding. Now, one of the things I did was I took samples of the water from the lake. I don't give up. I mean, I'm the kind of, and that's what you have to do in science. You don't just jump to the first idea that comes along. I mean, I have colleagues who are going to want the proof, So you go there, and you go there with a little vial, and you take, there is nothing very special about the water. I thought if there was, some evidence of an advanced, propulsion system or something, the components of the water might be changed, and I didn't find any of that. I have no explanation for the picture. There is nothing on the picture before, and there is nothing on the picture after.
Right.
You'd expect that there would be ripples in the water. There would be, if it really came out of the water, whatever it was, if it's material, it's very large. People say, well, it looks like a lens flare.
No.
But a lens flare, there has to be a source of light from below. This is, if you've been to that country, it's very, very sparsely populated. There is really nothing there.
That's
so,
it.
Except that beautiful lake. So it's.
I lived there
don't know.
10 years. I'm a field investigator, and I've been probably to the area 25 or 30 times. It's a high energetic area, and Lago de Cote is a old dormant volcano that's filled with water. It's only about a mile across in diameter. But the analysis, was that correct, that the craft was and lies at over 600 feet in diameter. And because of the height of the craft and the number of shots and the time in between the shots, it was like over 10,000 miles per hour. Is that correct?
Yes, but again, there may be a natural explanation for that picture. I just can't think of what it is.
Well,
It's not something that dropped from the aircraft, by the way.
Right.
I mean,
No.
we know that.
It looks like a silver disc. If people would like to check it out, you can Google it, Lago de Cote or Lake Coder, in 1971 in Costa Rica. It's probably one of the only true photos that I've seen in a long time. Lago de Cote, C-O-T-E, Lago, L-A-G-O, de Cote, or Lake Coder, either one. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I haven't heard anybody else talk about. I haven't heard anybody else talk about the photos and having things changed or manipulated before, but I've had experiences with my own stuff in photos, digital photos, and even audio because I'm involved in paranormal kind of stuff. I'll show it to somebody and they'll see it and we'll both see it, look at it a few times and look at it minutes later and it's gone. And it's happened with digital photos. I don't think I have video, but I have audio that does this all the time, and the voices will change into something completely different or be gone altogether. Have you had other experiences with this, or like, is there anything going on with review time? Because I mean, I've seen it change in minutes on the camera and then also later in review.
I have not had that kind of case, but that's well known in parapsychology, you know, of both remote photography of sites, like Ted Sirius and so on, and other strange things that happen to photographs. But in the cases I've mentioned, there didn't seem to have been a paranormal effect. It's just that it's certainly not normal.
Yeah.
When you take a good picture and the object isn't there. But there is no associated psychic effect or anything. If you know the story of Ted Sirius,
Yes.
There is a whole body of psychical phenomena around him. Anyway, here these are just ordinary people who just took a picture.
Okay.
So
All right. Thank you.
you're welcome.
My question is, what are your ideas about black triangles? And the reason I ask this is because back in 1997, I saw like 6 black triangles. They didn't have lights on them, but it made our house shake. It was about a 63 hertz frequency at about 260 beats per minute. And I had never reported it, but other people that were on the major highway reported it to New Fork or MUFON, and they saw them as floating rocks. But over our house, they were triangles or delta-shaped aircraft.
So how large were they? Because there seem to be 2 types. There's a small type, which is the size of a Cessna, and then there is this very large thing that is the size of this room, essentially.
No, I want to say like I might be incorrect, but about maybe dime shape if I held out my arms. And there was cloud cover, but they didn't. I live near Houston, and right near George Bush International Airport. So I see planes landing in there, but these triangles were moving like on an equatorial axis, and hovering, but that and making that type of frequency. And I wanted to figure out what that sound I heard was, and I put a function generator through my speaker system, and that frequency will cause a house to shake.
Well, that's what you did is very interesting. I haven't heard of other cases with sound or with, but I have some colleagues who've certainly looked at that. You've heard of Mr. Bigelow and the studies that he financed. In the 90s, the group did build up a catalog of large, mostly black triangles in the U.S., and there is no question people have seen them. There is a fairly recent case in France with people took a picture, but the picture was blurred by the lights along the road. But this was over a nuclear plant, not an army, depot of nuclear stuff, but just an electrical plant. France has a number of nuclear generators, and those places are obviously guarded, and there's a fence around it. These two people were workers, were finishing road work, fixing the road, and this was the end of the day, so it was already dark, and they saw this very large black object with lights. So it's not trying to hide itself, it's got lights on the apex, of the triangle, and flying over the facility slowly and just going on its way. Now, the facility obviously has cameras and security systems, but they are along the fence. They are not looking up, so they didn't detect anything. Now, this was reported to the French Space Agency, and we looked into the case. I'm a member of that group that looks at the unexplained cases, and we really couldn't come up. I mean, there's no question they saw this. It's too bad we don't have the picture, but we believe them. And we really don't know what that thing was. It didn't harm anybody. It didn't cause any failure of the equipment or anything else. But there is no question there were hundreds of observations over the U.S., mostly over certain corridors, apparently. But it's a mystery. So there are two ways you can come away from this. One is to say, well, there is some secret weapon they've been working on. They've been working on for 30 years. Come on. I mean, why are we paying for this? It would be deployed somewhere, or it would. If it's a strategic, device of some sort, we would be using it somewhere, and people would be reporting it, certain areas, and that's not happening. On the other hand, it's not your typical UFO either, and it's not hiding either. It's in plain sight with lights, flying slowly. So how come we can't get our arms around that? That's the frustration of this business. Yes.
Hi. I just want to say thank you for your work and your perspective and for talking here today and this weekend. And that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I've read your books, Masters of Deception and Passport to Magonia, and I highly recommend these to everybody here. It's spectacular research. It's original, and it's very different from what most of the speakers are talking about.
Well, let me stop you there. It's not easy to talk about this stuff. It's not pleasant to talk about people dying, because of that, especially when I don't have the complete proof of what I'm saying. But I'm saying, hey, let's pay attention to that side too,
Yeah, basically, if you're not familiar with it, there's another side to the coin. Everybody's talking about interplanetary aliens, from other planets. Well, there's a lot of evidence that many of these creatures and humanoids, or whatever you want to call them, that have come out of these spacecraft or whatever they are from another dimension. And that other dimension could be right here on this planet. And there's a well-documented history going back to all the multiple witnesses to, fairies, folklore, gnomes, and these other creatures which behave a lot like many UFO occupants are described as behaving at. And these go back, to Ireland, Scotland, Britain, way back to the Middle Ages. And,
Yes.
and there's just so many witnesses. And a lot of these creatures look just like the aliens that are reported in folklore. But I want to ask you, do you think it's possible that there's creatures also slightly beyond our range of vision, they're invisible like these creatures are, and they do know how to materialize? I don't know whether it's with their technologies or their psychic powers, but they are able to materialize quite well. But do you think there's also these invisible civilizations on Venus and Mars and Neptune and some of the other planets?
What we know of other planets, the argument has been shifting over the years. The argument now is that comes from observations on Earth of forms of life that should not exist. There should not be life in volcanic vents at the bottom of the ocean when the temperatures are extreme. There shouldn't be life in, under the ice in Antarctica. But that life is bacterial life or archaea, which is a new name. So biologists are discovering that life can exist in all kinds of places where, I would have flunked, my degree if I had suggested something like that when I went to school. So even forms of life that apparently they find on the outside of the space station. What is it? We know that nothing can live in outer space, right? Well, it does. So what is it? So we may have to extend the definition of life. Now, I don't think there are creatures like us on Venus or Mars. By now we would have seen them. On Mars, the idea of the controversy about life on Mars goes back to Carl Sagan and before, and my old mentor, Gérard de Vaucouleurs in Texas, that the conditions could be right on Mars for a form of life. But again, it would be microbial life. It would be, microorganisms. But those microorganisms could have effects on the environment in the Martian surface. And so that could explain some of the things that people are beginning to detect on Mars.
Well, it's like these things that have been photographed outside the space station. These are large, and they float around. And apparently, whatever they are, they're living where there's no oxygen, and it's hundreds of degrees below freezing. And they've come up so close. They've been right at the windows of the shuttle, and they've been right next to people walking on tethers, and just spinning around them, big red things in different colors and everything. But on that same thing, I was talking about the invisible creatures, which some people call the invisible college. These creatures, if they are in another dimension and they're not affected by our weather, they don't need oxygen, they don't need our atmosphere.
Right.
They could be on Venus where it's so hot it melts lead, but still they're invisible and they're in another dimension, and they might have a culture there. Yeah.
Well, that's why this field is so interesting, that we have all these unanswered questions.
Okay, well, thank you.
I'm just wondering if it's still possible to purchase your book, because I missed buying your book on the GoFundMe, and is it still available? Your big, beautiful book.
Wonders in the Sky?
Yes.
Yes, it's still available. If you look at my website, which is jacquesvallee.net, there is a link to, I don't sell my own books, but there is a link to a bookseller who still has about 100 of them.
Oh, okay.
There were only 500 printed, and for obvious reasons, it will never be reprinted.
Right.
Okay,
so it's now or never.
You can send him an email and he can get you the book.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That book was a lot of work, but it was.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
In the photographs that do show objects, are there any commonalities between either like the lens used, the focal length, shutter speed, film stock, any of that?
The woman's photograph?
Just anything that you've seen in any of your
We know
work?
everything. I mean, I had the camera. We have all the details about the camera. I mean, it was, it was a usual $15 instant camera that you throw away after you take the pictures.
But I mean, in any of the photographs that you've seen that do show objects, have you noticed common trends between,
No, I'm talking about the one in France. The one in, the one where there was nothing, and then what she described was this egg. The one in the car was a cell phone, was a 2-year-old Samsung cell phone. So we have the details of that.
Okay.
But, obviously it was working. There was no problem before or after with the cell phone. But it's a digital image. I'd much rather have a piece of film. Yep. But it's just as unexplained, Yes, sir.
It's really good to hear you speak. I've read several of your books a long, long time ago, back in the 70s. And anyway, I've had 3 direct experiences very close up with UFOs. I don't recall any missing time or marks or any of that sort of thing. But the first one that was really close was I looked out. My son was a baby at the time, and I was throwing him up in the air and catching him, and I looked out the window, and there's a bright light shining on my neighbor's tree. And at first I thought it was a plane flying over, because this was above Sacramento, and the Air Force Base would fly over, and they'd turn their lights off, their landing lights off, just as they got to 10,000 feet, which is the rule, right? But it was in between the mountain, and then I said, no, it's shining a light on the neighbor's tree. So I put the baby down, and I ran out the door toward the neighbor's tree. And as I got very, very close to it, so the UFO was about this big in my sight. And by the way, it was just like a diffuse light in the shape of a saucer with sort of a dome, like that. And with a bright, bright light, very like an extremely bright light shining on the neighbor's tree. As I got very, very close to it, maybe, 30 meters, the light went out, and it started rising up. Oh. And it went straight up. It was right around dusk, so it was, the sun had gone down, but it wasn't dark. It was summertime. It was June of 1981. And then it disappeared as a little dot. And at the same time, about a few days later, that neighbor called me up and said, we saw a UFO just like the one that you saw in our yard last night. And it left the leaves in a big swirl in the yard. You should come over and look at it, because we haven't disturbed them yet. So I went over and looked, and they knew I was a scientist and so on. And so I looked, and there were the leaves in a swirl, exactly as they had said. And it had shown up at 3 in the morning, just hovering right in their yard. And the same thing happened. It was completely silent, and it disappeared. No windows, no doors, no features, no obvious, lights around the edges like some of the ones that are shown. And then a few years later, and actually during that same period, many people in the area had seen many aerial phenomena or reported them to me or to people that I knew. A few years later, I was driving with my son from the Altamont Pass, that goes into Livermore, California. And one of the same exact craft type was going right along, and tracking our car, and followed our car for a short time, maybe 10, 15 seconds, and then went speeding up and went back down by the San Francisco Bay and around Mount Diablo out of sight. Very rapid. I mean, that had to have been thousands of miles per hour because it took maybe 10 seconds to go those 50 or so miles. And then another time at that exact same location, the same thing happened, except this time it went the other way. Those are my experiences. They all looked the same. They were all they were like a cloud of light, except they were very intact. Then also, in terms of photography,
Yes?
and I have tried to track this friend of mine down, but he showed me, this was about in the late 1970s. These were all 35 millimeter films taken in Georgetown, California. And it was very, very extremely clear pictures of a craft that was hovering stationary-wise. And he said that the occupant of the craft said, "I will allow you to take pictures of my craft, but not of me. You cannot take a picture of me. If you do, I'll destroy the film. But I will even position the craft in different positions so you can take it with the hill in behind, and there's an old Chevrolet truck with rust on it in the picture, right with it." And this is way before Photoshop, right? So this is in the late 1970s. And he had an entire roll of 36 exposures that were extremely clear. And
Where is it now?
I don't know. I've tried to track him down, and I can't find him now.
If you ever do, send me
I
a
will.
message.
They were the clearest photos I've ever. And the interesting thing was, and I know what plasma is. This craft could have been what I saw at night, but in the broad daylight, it looked like it was a brushed stainless steel, right? But no windows, no doors. But on the surface, you could see the surface extremely clearly in the photo. You could see the ionized gas of oxygen and nitrogen, blue and orange of the nitrogen, on the surface of that craft.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm told we have 10 minutes, so keep your questions relatively brief if you can.
So I know that you have a very broad mind, so thank you for being here and sharing with us. Back in the 1970s, I knew a woman who was a clairvoyant with etheric vision. She could see fairies and such. And she had nothing to gain she was not into making any publicity. She happened to be part of a meditation group I was part of. In any case, I asked her why people saw flying saucers. What were they? And, there's no simple explanation in any of this, but she was speaking from her own experience. And she said that she thought they were Davic life, angelic life, that would then take the appearance of the expectation, or at least of the language in the mind of the person who was viewing them, so that they conformed to the experience of the viewer. It sounds very quantum mechanical, if you will, that things do not appear until they're observed. As I thought about that, I was also thinking about the stomata, as I was listening to your talk, the stomata that would appear on the bodies of medieval saints, etc.
Yes.
And if you put the two thoughts together, that if a person has some type of etheric vision and conforms to what their expectation might be, and if it happens to be disturbing to them, that they have a stomatic reaction, so that possibly could create symbols or effects on their body. So that was my comment, and for what it's worth, thank you for coming.
Thank you. Well, that's not exactly what Carl Jung said, and I wouldn't presume to interpret what he said, but you could argue that there is a psychological phenomenon where people create the appearance of something that will heal them, of some condition, either a psychical condition or a physical condition. And that, that sounds good, and it's, it may be true of the interpretation of an experience, but that doesn't explain the holes in the ground and the burns and everything else. So it only goes so far, but it's part of the whole equation. Yes? Yes, ma'am.
I want to commend you for a lifetime of open-minded scientific research into a very mysterious and perplexing phenomenon.
It's not over yet.
Indeed, quite so. I hope you live forever. In our minds, you certainly will, and in our hearts. I remember seeing you promoted during the 1960s when I was a child on television as a reputable, credible, scientific authority on this subject. And I want to let you know that personally it impacted me in a very positive way, because despite a media machine and government engaged in a concerted, coordinated policy of denial, discreditation, and cover-up, you have persisted. I want to commend you for that. Here is my question. Have you ever experienced any governmental pushback or any experiences with men in black or sinister agents?
No. I wouldn't think it would work very well on me. But, maybe I'm just flattering myself that I would, be strong enough to just go on with what I'm doing. No, I have not had any overt, threats to, for me to stop this research. I think, they, whatever they are, may be interested in something else. And what I'm really doing may be irrelevant to them, or they maybe it can be useful to them. I mean, research is research. So I rather, we know that the government has been interested from the beginning. A government, but there is no such thing as a government, I mean, you have different factions within the government. You have different things that they can do that are very specialized. You have, the Navy, likes, run silent, run deep. The Air Force has been in the news, but they didn't want to be in the news. They really didn't want to study UFOs. And so you have all these different fragments of the government that do their own, they manage their own environment and their own mission, I think, in a large extent to the best of their ability. And this is disturbing, their image. It's disturbing their own research and so on. So I don't think the government has necessarily an answer. They look at fragmented things, and what we really need to do is to turn this over to we mentioned the internet at the beginning. The internet wasn't built by the government. It was built by a loose conglomeration of individual teams that were interested in pushing the limit of what you could do with computers. And they were open proposals for research, and the best ones were funded. Some of the research worked, some of it didn't, and and we ended up with the ARPANET that turned into the internet, that turned into the web. Okay, and that's really the way big scientific problems should be approached, because there are a lot of clever people everywhere.
Well, thank you again for your dedication
Thank you.
and your tremendous contribution to the field of UFO study.
Well, thank you. I think we're out of time, right? So, thank you very much. Thank you.